Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you and welcome to the latest in our series of Doha Debates, coming to you from the Gulf state of Qatar and sponsored by the Qatar Foundation. Despite what they say in some cultures, school isn't always the happiest time of your life. Instead of being encouraged to explore, question and innovate, young people can often be fed hatred and prejudice, their learning restricted by censorship and government propaganda. Such is the reality in many parts of the world, and here too in the Middle East. When it comes to free speech, there are, of course, no absolutes. All states restrict information. But what we're asking tonight is this: where governments censor educational material for political reasons or to push a particular ideology or a distorted version of history, where key facts are consistently omitted because they're inconvenient or deemed sensitive, where criticism of rulers and ruling parties is stifled, can this type of education have any value at all? Well, our motion tonight: this House believes education is worthless without freedom of speech. And as usual, our panellists come at the topic from very different points of view. Speaking for the motion, Dennis Hayes, founder of Academics for Academic Freedom and Professor of Education at the University of Derby in the UK. And with him, Tariq Ramadan, Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at Oxford University. He's also visiting professor at the Faculty of Islamic Studies here in Qatar. Speaking against the motion, Nagla Rizk, Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Research at the School of Business at the American University in Cairo. She's also Affiliate Scholar at the Yale Law School. And with her, Kevin Watkins. He's Director of the Education for All Global Monitoring Report, led by UNESCO, and a Senior Visiting Research Fellow at the Global Economic Governance Programme at Oxford University. A lot of titles, though. Ladies and gentlemen, that's our panel. And now let me start by asking Dennis Hayes to speak for the motion.
When you're listening to discussions on freedom of speech, the important thing is to listen for the small words. And the word I'd advise you to look for is but. You'll always hear this sentence: I'm in favour of freedom of speech, but. And then will come a list of people whose freedom of speech you don't want to hear. And I want to make the case for free speech in a way you may not have heard before. Free speech has to be defined. When we talk about free speech, we're talking about rational speech, the ability to argue, probe, question, criticise. That's what free speech means. And free speech is just not one freedom amongst other freedoms. It's the foundational freedom. If you don't have freedom of speech, all your other freedoms mean nothing. But people misunderstand constantly the importance of freedom of speech. And it's not about having racists, Islamic extremists, or anyone airing their views. It's about you, the audience. Whether the audience is here in this auditorium, whether it's a classroom, a lecture, or a seminar, it's about having confidence in you as human beings to make up your own mind and not to be told what to think by anybody in authority or by anybody on this panel. It's a great faith in human beings, and I have utter faith in your ability to be rational and to make a decision that is based on the evidence and what you've heard. What I don't want to do is not allow you to hear and not to make up your own mind. Because education that takes place like that is not education. When education begins, it begins by trying to get people to be critical from the first moment. If that doesn't happen, then it's not education you have, it's training.
Could I ask you to wind up?
You're being trained in a way that's no different than animals. Thank you.
Dennis Hayes, thank you very much indeed. Where is this dreamland, this utopia where free speech exists and where you don't have to battle for it? Where there are no buts? Not in Britain, surely.
It's certainly not in Britain. The price of free speech is constant vigilance. You have to constantly fight the battle.
So why are you engaged in this worthless educational process in Britain then, if there's no free speech there? Why don't you resign now and give it up?
Well,
it's clearly worthless.
I'm sure that's what my Vice-Chancellor might say. Why do you keep raising objections? Because someone has to do the Socratic job. Remember the case of Socrates. There's a model to us all.
No, but my point is it's a battle everywhere, isn't it?
Of course.
So, you're engaged in a worthless educational process because you have to battle.
That just doesn't follow. You have to battle, and that's what education is about. And battle in this sense means raise
But if free speech doesn't exist anywhere, then the educational process...
I never said free speech doesn't exist. I said you have to be constantly vigilant
Where does
in
it
fighting
exist? Tell me where it is.
Well, it exists here, if you take my point, which is it exists in the minds of the audience. It exists in their minds, in the ability for everybody in this audience to make up their own mind.
Isn't it?
Well, that's the thing. We have a depressing view of human beings now, that they're not up to it. You know, and it's often minority groups in Britain, you know, whether you're a Muslim student, you're black, it's you who are told you can't make up your mind, so somebody who's white has to tell you what you should hear. Right? That's not acceptable. Right? The whole of humanity can make up its mind. There aren't specific groups that should be banned from making up their own mind because somebody in power or authority says, I'll make up my mind for you.
But what are students supposed to battle for here if freedom of speech actually doesn't exist anywhere in the terms in which you're talking about it?
Well, freedom of speech, I would say, is under threat in every single university for different reasons. Often now, it's not the clash of ideas in a threatening way, it's the idea that you must teach people with respect. So basically, you'll learn not to say anything. So the silence that leads you to a therapeutic approach to free speech. You end up, if I say something that you find offensive, then I'm put into counselling rather than argued with.
All right, Dennis Hayes, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Could I ask now Nagla Risk, please, to speak against the motion?
Thank you. This is not about defending freedom of speech. At this end of the table, we are as committed to freedom of speech as anyone in this audience or on the panel. This is about the worthiness of education or absolute total lack thereof in the absence of free speech. It is not even about the extent of worthiness. Education is either worthy or worth zero in the absence of freedom of speech, and that is why I am on this side of the motion. I am here to defend education. I am here because of my education. I come from Egypt. I was born and raised in Egypt. I come from a family of doctors who were educated in Egypt, and for years they have been treating women, men, and children of their ailments. You want to tell me that this education is worthless? You want to tell some of the members of this very audience may come from repressive societies. Has their education been worthless? I argue that education is at the heart of planting a seed that will indeed bring about an intellectual capital and a reservoir of knowledge and human will that will turn to change things around and that will create the very freedoms that they see around them restricted. Education is a catalyst of change. Where do Egyptian bloggers come from? What about Tunisian techies who break the walls of internet censorship and create and find uncensored sites and share it with the world through the education that they have learned and through the democratizing technologies that are everywhere around us? What about women who learn to read and write and as they do that, learn to speak up against their abusers in Egyptian society? And I witnessed this firsthand. You want to tell me that their education has been worthless? Indeed, what's wrong with training that helps somebody find a job, provide for his basic or her basic needs, make a living for their family, promote dignity and self-esteem? Indeed, in bringing to life Amartya Sen's notion of development as freedom. Is this education worthless? What's wrong with that? Education creates freedoms and promotes human development. Voting for the motion is not defending freedom of speech. In fact, voting against the motion is indeed congruent with freedom of speech. Thank you.
Nagla Risk, thank you very much indeed. You seem to believe that free speech is a sort of optional extra. You can manage without it in education somehow. But what's the message to people here that, yeah, it's okay, you have a good education, but actually the free speech is a little bit of icing on the cake?
Well, you have a good education, and the value of education is a belief in the innate capacity of people to turn things around.
Wouldn't the Arab world be doing a lot better in a lot of other regions in the world if they had free speech?
Other things being constant, other things being the level of development, poverty, unemployment.
No, fact, they would, wouldn't they? They'd have more entrepreneurs, they'd invent more, they'd be more innovative, wouldn't they? You said so yourself, you're co-author of the 2009 Arab Knowledge Report.
There's nothing wrong with that. This does not mean that education is worth zero. It is about the worthlessness of education.
So a society that in your report is described as a one-dimensional vision that rejects change, creativity and innovation is still a valuable educational process?
Of course, education process will promote innovation and will bring about freedom of
an educational system rejecting change, creativity and innovation is still valuable? How is that possible?
Out of that system, I have belief in the individual capacity to ask questions. I am a product of that system, and I am here now.
Individual capacity is different from the education, isn't it? You're talking about two different things.
No, individual capacity.
People do things in spite of their education, not necessarily because, don't they?
Given the education, given everything around them, they will change. These are people who are exposed. This is not living in some la-la land. This is reality, and this is people exposed to the technologies around them, and they will bring change.
And the philosopher A.C. Grayling, who said, without free speech, there cannot be genuine education and research, you reject that, do you?
Well, another philosopher said that education creates freedom. Education
so it's your philosopher
freedom.
against my philosopher, isn't
well.
it? Marvelous. Thank you very much indeed. Now, could I ask, please, Tariq Ramadan to speak for the motion?
Yes, I'm supporting this motion exactly because I think that this black and white attitude by saying, oh, it's not worthless because it's not zero, is problematic. We have to ask ourselves what are the objectives of education. And this is the main discussion here. The objective of education is to promote knowledge, and knowledge is part of the freedom. The second thing is understanding, because knowledge without understanding, this is something which is problematic. This is the useful knowledge that we have even in the Islamic tradition, and we have to say to the people that this is very much the Islamic roots of everything that we are saying, but it's universal. And then to get what at the end? What do we want? Do we want autonomous beings, being able to think for themselves, to be autonomous, and to act in the name of the knowledge that they are gaining. And I think that at the end, what you are saying and what could be understood is that, oh yes, of course, education is always good, but there could be an education which is distorted as to the principles, and you support a system spreading knowledge without critical thinking. And at the end, critical thinking is to be able to speak, is to be able to criticize, is to be able to question, is to be able to contest and to say, I am free to say whatever I want. So the very essence of education should protect this dimension. If not, it's a distorted education, and it could be counterproductive, producing parrots and sheep, following the system, being able to say, and this is the problem that we have. Why don't we have change in the Muslim majority countries? Because very often we repeat. It's an education about repeating what is said. No critical thinking, no creativity. So this is the problem. So it's not a black and white. It's something which is come to the essence of education and come to this freedom of expression is the way you are giving me the means for me to be free, to be dignified, to be a human being, and this is where I can change the society. Because at the end, what we want is really this, is to be educated, to be dignified, and to change the society, to reform the society for the better.
Would you wrap it up,
Not
please?
An education that is supporting a system. We give you something to think with, but nothing to change the world with. And this is, for me, something which is important. And out of all the education that you can promote with this system is a lack of courage. You know what we need today? Students in the Muslim majority countries, but also in the West, having autonomy and courage to challenge the opinions of even the government.
Okay. Tariq Ramadan, thank you very much indeed. No autonomy and courage among the students out here? You don't find that anywhere? The students that you teach?
I want them to be more courageous, and I want them to be, all of us, you and me, we have to be much more courageous, to be able to stand for our thoughts, and then to promote a system. And then you were asking the question about us teaching in Britain, for example, or here. At the end of the day, it's not by criticizing and being passive with the system that we are going to change it. It's to be involved within it and to ask our students to be challenged.
Is it any better in the West than it is here? I mean, people think they're getting the whole truth and nothing but the truth in the West. They wake up disappointed to find actually it wasn't any truer than anywhere else, was it?
With your question, we are in a black and white attitude. We have many things to reform in the West. You know, when you tell to the people in the West, you are free to decide whatever you want, and they don't have a knowledge of history. You are free to be religious or not religious. No religious education. Religious illiteracy, and you are free. That's the wrong...
So education's pretty bad everywhere. This is what you're saying.
No. I'm saying that education could be better everywhere, which is not exactly the pessimist attitude that you are.
And better with what?
With the critical thinking.
I mean, what's their message? What's the message to people out here who have to live with